Welcome to the Creative Life Podcast. My name is Caroline, and I am your host. Today on the podcast, we have another Caroline Nagy. And Caroline is a sociologist of music who I've known for a long time. We knew each other first, both working for a music school in New York City. And she has since that time gone on to study and do a master's degree in sociology. And she's now applied that work to researching the lives of modern independent musicians and creatives who make their living in the arts and other fantastic and wonderful, beautiful artistic things. Caroline is also a musician in her own right. She studied violin throughout university and continues to play and create now. And she'll tell us a little bit about the piece that she has in this summer's Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So, without further ado, let's get to the interview. Here's Caroline. Caroline Nagy is with us today, and I'm really excited. I heard her speak a couple of weeks ago about some of her recent work, and I'm excited that she's here to share it with all of our listeners. So, Caroline, thanks for being here, and I'm hoping you can start us off and just tell us a little bit about what you do. I mean, that's the question. Profession, hobbies, anything. What do you do?
Hi, Dr. Moore. Thank you for having me.
You can just call me Dr. Caroline. That's fine.
Dr. Caroline. Hi, thanks for having me. Well, I started playing violin when I was 5, and so I've had the pleasure of just being surrounded by musicians my whole life since then. My undergrad is in music from DePaul with a W in Indiana. And then I started working in arts administration when I started to get frustrated trying to gig as a violinist. And I worked for a music school in New York City that you know well. And from there, I started noticing just some inequalities within professional artist vocations, kind of specifically with working musicians. And I wanted to study it a little bit more. And so I decided to go back to school for a master's in sociology and really got sucked into the sociology of music. And with that, I've just discovered a whole extra layer of respect for lifelong musicians, specifically independent musicians, those non-commercially linked musicians. And I've also shared in a lot of their frustration with needing to legitimize their careers. If you are a musician, I'm sure you've gotten this question, as many musicians have, is what's your day job, or how much money do you really make in this city? And I wanted to try to ask different questions with this new path of work I'm doing, which is sociology of music research, but with an extra layer of creative data sharing with it. That is more, audiences are more willing to take it in if it's shared in a creative way, as opposed to just a 17-page journal article or some long data-driven statistical hoopla that is put out there right now with quantitative data. So my area right now is looking at independent musicians. I just finished a project here in West Hollywood on independent musicians, where I spent a year studying 23 musicians ranging in age from 25 to 81. And I just looked at their life courses, their musicianship, their solidarity, and tried to gather why it's important for a community as small as West Hollywood, which is 1.9 square miles, why it's so important for us to value, pay, and attract musicians to our city, and what that brings to our community beyond the economic value. And that's what I've been trying to do right now.
Awesome. I'm interested because I've never lived in LA. I've only visited a few times. Could you, what is West Hollywood like? How would you describe it? Because I think we all think of Los Angeles being this huge creative hub, and also, like you mentioned, commercially driven creative hub. What's going on in West Hollywood?
Sure. That's a great question, because a lot of people are not familiar with West Hollywood beyond maybe our Pride Parade or something. West Hollywood is a 1.9 square mile city, and we're kind of coin ourselves as the playground between Hollywood and Beverly Hills. And starting back in the 60s and 70s, we were just a gathering space for everything counterculture. So like hippies, musicians, artists just flooding the area. And the Sunset Strip, this iconic strip, kind of continued through as a cultural center for punk rock, wave through the 70s, Led Zeppelin, Elton John, the Doors, all kind of crowding these places like Troubadour, Whiskey Go-Go, Roxy. And then we get into this 80s heavy metal era that I just love. The Van Halen, the Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, just redefining what excess is here. And it was during the 80s that we became incorporated. And this is done by kind of an unlikely coalition of LGBTQ activists, seniors, most of them immigrant, and just really angry renters. And since then, since the 60s, 70s, and since our incorporation in 84, we kind of have this reputation of progressive legislation, social change, and especially LGBTQ plus culture. So we have, 40% of our residents identify as LGBTQ plus. We have our carnival parades, our Halloween parades. We have one of the highest U.S. concentrations of public art and arts programming, given our size.
Wow.
On any given decade, we have between 8 to 12 musical venues in this, again, 1.9 square mile city. So we're really everything cultural, musical, artistic has historically been a huge part of West Hollywood. A lot of it's changing now, but this is one of the reasons my partner and I chose to move here. You think about all the musical venues here that are going every single night. Tower Records, that iconic Tower Records that almost every musician got their start at and saw their CDs at. That's right down the street. But unfortunately now it's a Supreme, to talk about change. So it's a really special place. Unfortunately, again, changing, but it's still a very special place, a very musical place, an artistic place.
So you mentioned that when you moved to LA, that was one of the compelling reasons to move to that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And have you found that as somebody who is in the arts and has a history in music, did you find it to be a welcoming place? Like, are the artists that are there, open to newcomers when they come to join the community? And did you find that it was like a come on in, the water's yes. fine vibe? Yeah.
It's a friendly city. It's one of the most walkable cities. I think it's been voted the most walkable city in California. So what you find is a lot of people that are transplants here. They're transplants for various reasons. They want to come out here, discover their creative musical selves. They might have been, if they are within the LGBTQ circles of past or present, they might not be accepted within certain family structures. So they come out here to find their chosen families. So it is a welcoming welcoming community in many ways. And I found that. And we have been here since 2017 and very much enjoy it.
So when you started your project now when you're interviewing musicians, how did you find the musicians that you chose to include, or that wanted to be included, I should say? I know it's always difficult to find research subjects that will commit mm-hmm. To the whole thing or to get excited about it. But how did you find your people?
Yeah, that's when we look at collecting our samples, to get nerdy for a second, it's tricky because we look at populations that sometimes are vulnerable, protected. But in the case of musicians, I think this is one of the many reasons I am attracted to musicians, because they're just so open. And they're accessible in many ways. So I started with just people I had met since 2017 coming here. And there's some people in the building. I go out several nights a week. I love hearing live music. And so you start to talk to musicians afterwards, and you start telling them what you're doing, and they immediately will say, yes, of course, I'd love to participate. And we say in the field, it's convenient sampling or snowball sampling. It's random. It's not really randomized. But it works, and I tried to make sure that we had genders represented, which is pretty easy to do, LGBTQ plus represented, and then equally important, different genres, different ages, different instruments. So this particular study had everything from, again, 25 to 81-year-olds, a nice representation of male, female, non-binary, LGBT, and then all the instruments, from voice, guitars, piano, violin, double bass, oboe, flute, composers, conductors, and then all the genres: pop, rock, folk, R&B, drag, jazz, classical, and almost everything had alt in front of it. And it was 23 independent professional musicians. And the most important thing I tell people is that these were people that either are doing it full time, meaning they don't have another job, or there are people that are trying to get to be professional musicians. So the big distinction with my work is that music is not a hobby for the people that I'm studying right now. This is a profession. This is what is driving them. This is all they want to do.
This is their job. This is what they hope to be.
Yes.
Their job. But you mentioned that these are independent musicians. So by independent, you don't mean hobbyists, like you said. You mean that they're unattached to a commercial label.
Right. That's right. Okay. And that's not to say that if a huge commercial label came to them and offered them a contract, they would not take it, but they have not chosen to make that a main priority in their career. And that was another distinction in talking to musicians about music, because we're in LA, as many people who've been here or live here understand, is that we are a city of fame. We're a city of celebrity. People are famous for being famous here. And when people come out here, a lot of times that is the priority, even within the artistic creative world. We might be the creative capital of the world. However, we are the most famous celebrity-driven capital of the world as well. And so that dichotomy between fame and staying true to your art is one that I was very interested in with this work. And some of the musicians talked about, okay, my connection has always been to music. That's the strongest connection. And as one bassist pointed out, if your connection is to fame, that will drive you that way. And nothing's wrong with that. Many of the musicians, to my surprise, did not like the term selling out, meaning they didn't want to critique any musicians for wanting to make money in the way they wanted to make money in music. And so you're welcome to do whatever you want to do. We're going to stay with you. We're going to find solidarity with you. But if your connection is to fame, that probably means you're on a different path. I think it was in the Michael Jackson Thriller documentary. As wonderful a musician as Michael Jackson is, and I love his music, one of the things they said about him is that he was the expert in perfecting the hit. He just knew how to perfect the hit.
Yeah.
Or you have people like Prince that'll say, when you sit down to write something, there should be no guidelines. The main idea is not supposed to be how many different ways can we sell this. That's so far from the true spirit of what music is.
Right.
So you're struggling out here to find yourself as a musician, make ends meet, but what are those ends to you?
Do you feel like it's really, I mean, this is not, I know they're not the topic of the paper, but do you feel like people are able to make a living, I'm saying in air quotes, as an independent musician in Los Angeles in 2025? Or is that just becoming more and more of an impossibility? Gosh, that's a leading question. No,
it's not. No, because I can answer it how I would answer it if it was asked a different way.
In a more elegant way.
No. I know exactly what you're saying. And yes, you can, but I'll get to the second part of that in a second. The industry, if you talk to any musicians, has changed drastically. So there are still avenues to make money. And that could be everything from teaching. That can be if you are into sound technology, sound producing. Session work is still a thing, although that is shrinking out here as the film industry continues to struggle. Composition, there is gigging. If you can sell tickets at these music venues, then you can navigate the pay to play. There's also the wedding gigs and the event gigs that if you are paid the union wage, then that works. But the other part of my study was really looking at theories that are already out there in the social science world and flipping them upside down in their heads when it comes to musicians, when you apply them to us musicians. And one of them is the post-materialistic theory. And this is by Ron Engelhardt back in 1977, his book, The Silent Revolution. And Engelhardt says, there's a way that some of us value orientation a little bit differently. It emphasizes self-expression. autonomy, quality of life over economic and physical security. And that includes more secular rational values, like we're more open to different identities, not so much into traditional marriage values, stuff like that, but always emphasizing self-expression and autonomy and self-actualization over economic and physical security. And that's how I found a lot of the musicians in the study were able to make a living, because they don't really need as much as we think of people needing, the average human being. A lot of them were not married. Majority of them, I think only 3 of them had children. So there's a different lifestyle there.
Interesting. Very interesting. And do you think that is some of that a conscious choice, from the outset of understanding that the path is going to require this of me? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to make a choice to live in a certain way? Or is it more that their personal life requires adjustment because of the commitment to the art form?
Mm-hmm. It depends. A lot of the musicians, and actually I'm going to go back to my New York study to answer this question. So these studies were not exactly the same. They have different variables, different research questions. So I have to be careful of doing too much of a comparison between the two. But I did do a study in New York City on musicians that were over the age of 40. They had degrees. They were educated musicians, and they were full-time musicians. And that as well, I found a majority of musicians were either, I think only 2 had children at the time. Several of them were divorced. And I had quotes from them saying how challenging it was to be a full-time musician, what that had done to their lives. And many of them had decided not to have children because they had witnessed other professional musicians and what that had done and how children had struggled within that those familiar structures. So I think it's a couple different ways. The younger musicians in my Los Angeles study are of the Gen Z generation, and so they are not placing as much value on the marriage and the children, I heard, and music was more important to them.
I find this fascinating because I'm kind of in that situation of being an artist and musician. I have 2 toddlers at home, mm-hmm. and it really cramps your style. It really, they're great, but I haven't performed in really performed, in years, or made that the focus of my life, and mm-hmm. in a way that was at one time. So I can understand why, people who have a clear focus on what their lifestyle needs to be to maintain a career, how that can control your choices.
And I found that with the New York City, I specifically chose over 40 because if you were still doing music, I felt over 40 and you're doing it full time and all in, that means you were probably in it for life at that point. What I've found is that it's usually around the age of 30 to 32 is when the musician, whether educated or not, and the person who pursues music will hit this point of, am I going to do this full time? Or do I switch to the hobby mentality?
30 to 32.
32 is what I'm finding right now. And that has, I think, back to your question, has a lot to do with the family questions. What mm-hmm. do I need in life? Do I need a certain salary? Do I need to support a spouse? Do I have children? How many children? Where are we going to live?
Right. It doesn't matter so much when you're in your 20s. Yeah. You haven't thought, for a lot of people, you don't think about it yet. That's really interesting.
And you have people that are in your 50s, actually 80s, even in this study, that do still live the post-materialistic lifestyle. They've figured out what is most important to them. They have a very simplistic life, and music is the driver behind all of that. And that's what I've always respected, and kind of the genesis of this work is to get behind that musician and value them and make sure that our cities and towns are valuing these types of people, because allowing them to just be musicians is an important thing in what it brings to our communities.
Absolutely. Do you find that in West Hollywood, where you are, that the community of non-musicians is actively a part of supporting the community of musicians?
Definitely. I don't think you move here and you're somebody who's not valuing the arts. I don't know anybody, neighbors, people that sit next to you in the restaurants. People want to talk about the arts here. So I just can't imagine choosing West Hollywood as a place to visit or live if you are not somebody who really enjoys the arts. So I call them culturally hybrid audiences here, meaning they're very open to different genres, different types of music. They're not the musician snob, if you will. There's a particular theorist out there named Pierre Bourdieu who has his theory, this we call it the snob theory, where those of us with high musical or cultural capital were the arbiters of what constitutes a good taste. The champagne music versus the table music. But here in West Hollywood, we do more what I refer to as a cultural omnivore mindset, which is by a gentleman named Richard Peterson in the 90s, who is this anti-snob theorist, who says that the consumers, or in my case, the producers, the musicians are much more open to, again, different genres, crossing barriers, playing different types of music, enjoying different types of music. And what that does to a city and what it does to the audiences when you have the producers and musicians that are cultural omnivore mindsets as well and not snobby.
And part of that, I think, is the audience understanding their role as being necessary and important, like the audience, like being a patron of the art as being a requirement. I mean, if there are, the community has to be active patrons, or the community doesn't exist.
Exactly, to go and hear live music and to participate in live music. I just heard an outstanding concert last Sunday by the Gay Man's Chorus of Los Angeles. And two of the musicians were in this study from that chorus, the musical director and the accompanist. And the theme was Rhinestone Cowboy, and it was bringing country music through the voices of the Gay Man's Chorus, which is a unique thing to do. And what it got into the question of who is country music for, who creates country music. And the audience, I always like to sit in the back and observe audiences. And the audience were just so into it. It was such a wide range. You had everything from the gay men in rhinestone cowboy outfits, just having a great time, to the older patrons that are subscribers having an equally, enjoyable experience, and this interconnectedness between all these different populations.
This is a sidebar, but the Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles is fantastic, and listeners, you should look up some of their recordings on if you haven't heard them before. They're amazing.
Their concerts are moving because they bring up musicians who are gay men, and they talk about, in this particular concert, what it was like hearing country music as a young child. And this one particular gay man talked about how struggling, and Cowboy Take Me Away was one that he just kept listening to over and over again, or how his mother walked in on him singing Man, I Feel Like a Woman, just a little too much as well.
That's amazing. Wow. So do you feel like there's also the camaraderie, the community aspect between the different art forms that you found? So not just amongst musicians, but what about the other arts?
So I only studied musicians, and I have to be careful not to talk outside of the other classifications of artists if I haven't properly studied them. But we use the word solidarity in sociology, and there is solidarity among the musicians. And many of these musicians also will write, or they might act in a little bit. So they have other artistic, creative mindsets. But there is definitely solidarity here that I may have not experienced in New York City. Solidarity as far as, not conforming to this dominant Los Angeles commercial music label restriction world. And solidarity among those that are pursuing an independent field, and however that path is, respecting that and wanting to help those musicians legitimize it in their own way. So I think there's definitely this camaraderie or solidarity among the musician field. I want to be careful not to say that among writers or other people as well, since I haven't studied them.
Anecdotally, though, as a resident of the neighborhood, I'm sure some of these things. It stands to reason that there would be, what's the expression? game recognizes game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's, that there is an idea of like, I get that what you're doing in your art form it's a different medium, but we still have the same goals of creative expression and communication, and it's just coming in this different way. So I can imagine that there would be happy symbiosis between these groups.
Absolutely. If you came out here to explore your creative self, I think I would say yes. I would hypothesize yes, that is definitely a thing out here.
Yeah. What has this done for you as a musician?
For me, I definitely have played my violin a lot more. I've been driven to play my violin a lot more. I think any musician out there can understand these periods where you just put your instrument away and you just need a break, and it's not working out for you. I had a big period in my 20s of that where I put my violin away for years, and then started pulling it out when people asked me to just play for a wedding, as we always get asked to do. And then it just became a vehicle just to calm down, to get back to myself, remind myself why I love music, and that violin has always served that purpose. And then through this study, going and hearing so many musicians play, but also then speak about their music, for me, it has driven an extra creative door for me. And this August, my partner, who is a comedian here, a writer and a teacher, is going to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival again this year, and he has a show there called Los Angeles Fake Friends and Real Stories, and he is asked me to come over and tell a story. And it's a story of back in 2022, my mother was suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's, and she could not recognize that the 17-year-old dog needed to be put down, and it was heartbreaking. And so we devised this whole plan of bringing in a vet, getting my mom out of the house, and for 1 hour I had to go in with a vet and kill this dog, murder this dog. And it was and everything went wrong. And this is all a true story. And so I decided for a few years now, I wanted to tell the story, because anybody I tell the full story to finds it incredibly amusing, sad, heartbreaking, and hilarious all at the same time. And I thought that if I go ahead and bring my violin with me, then I can tell this in an even more creative way. So my piece is called How to Murder the Family Dog, in the style of Peter and the Wolf. And if you're not familiar with Peter and the Wolf, it's a piece that Prokofiev wrote, where it's narrated. The best narration is by David Bowie, by the way. A narrated story of Peter going and showing bravery with a whole wolf story and other animals. And I bring my violin and I use the different melodies from the animals to represent different people in this story, from my brother to my father to the vet, etc. So coming soon to hopefully Netflix after August 2025.
We're ready for that special.
That is what a study like this has done, is open my mind to reminding myself of, you grew up as a musician, you watched your brother start playing violin, and that's what you wanted to do. And you wanted to do that for so many years, and you can still do that, and you can still use your creativity. And these musicians in this study have reminded me of how fun that is.
Yeah. Well, do you remember back why you put your violin away in your 20s? What do you think it was?
That's a good question. I think when you grow up in a town, I grew up in Chicago, and you are first chair in orchestra pretty much your whole life, you develop this false ego where you think that you're going to really be able to make it in this business as a violinist. And then you go to school and you realize, okay, now I'm sitting in the second violin section, and that's just perfectly fine. But then you get out in the world and you realize there is a violinist on every corner in a city like New York City, and you struggle with it. And I struggled with, what do I want to do in life? How do I want to do this? How do I reconcile being a musician, but also needing to make money? And I decided, for me, I wanted to make a little money and get known a little bit within the artistic world, but in the more administrative side of it. And so the only way I could do that is to put my violin away. and
Mm.
had to put it away. And then I don't really remember what it was that got me to pull it back out. Probably somebody asked me to play. And then you have that moment of remembering, I love playing so much and I miss it. And if I don't continue to play, any violinist knows this, your fingers turn back into regular human hands, your calluses go away, your neck hurts, your back hurts, your shoulder hurts. So it's also knowing that if I stop at this age, then your body will not let you start up again.
Sure. I mean, I think it's also maybe widely accepted that the violin is the most competitive and difficult of the orchestral instruments. Is that fair to say? Sorry, anybody who plays the oboe who's listening to this who doesn't agree, but I think,
You know that question of what would you have done differently? I would have played viola.
Viola.
I would have played viola. I love viola. I love the timbre of viola.
Me too.
Like violist. I really like violist. I find that violists are excellent human beings. So yes, if you are listening and you're thinking about, do I want to be a violinist? Try the viola.
A lot less competitive. There are fewer violists. They're just fewer violists studying. Yeah. That's fascinating. Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a different feeling about making art when it is your job, particularly in the performing arts, where so much of the commerce that's involved and getting the job it involves just auditioning and trying and waiting, right? And practicing on your own, which can be very solitary and lonely, and playing the same things over and over again, trying to get those jobs, versus doing it because you just choose to, and you're not doing it for your bread. You're just doing it so you can play whatever you want. I mean, I think that when I first started playing and singing whatever I want, that was a real change in my life.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. For so many years of just doing what your teachers told you to do or what you were hired to do, and those things learning. And then all of a sudden, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to pick this thing up. That's it's different.
The musicians in New York were talking about the creative gig versus the functional gig and the big distinction between those two, and how you can get to just playing the creative gigs and getting away from the functional gigs, those pocketbook canon gigs, and how do I leave that? And when you can get to a point where you are only doing the creative gigs that you want to be doing, playing new music, playing music that really fulfills you, that's interesting, that's so well written. Not that pocketbook canon's not well written, by the way.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that we've all played it, and that's the case. We've all played it a million times. Yeah, that's interesting. But there's in certain places, maybe West Hollywood is one of these places. There's more access to the creative gig lifestyle aspect. If people are able to pursue that path, and that the functional gigging is supporting the creative gigging rather than the other way around.
Right. And the audiences are there to support it as well.
Right. I can imagine that is a lot for the creative spirit, and then a little bit of creativity creates more creativity.
I think so.
You feel?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yes. In yourself, and also in what you see around you. And it's very much like we become what we see, or we envision what we see for ourselves.
When we're surrounded by other creative people. Absolutely.
When you were a music student, were you given the opportunity to really think creatively and make decisions like that for yourself? Or was it kind of a, here you go, Caroline, this is what we're doing this semester kind of thing?
I think because it was the 90s. It was not a conservatory that I went to, but they still used conservatory mentality. So it was all classical. And if I was to go back and do it all over again, besides picking up the viola, I would play a lot more non-classical music, and I would have allowed myself to learn a lot more non-classical music. And I always do the what if, late at night or on runs. What if that had been what I had done, and allowed myself to play more pop music? Where would I be right now? If I had stepped away from Suzuki and really learned to improvise and really learned to let myself not be so constrained to musical theory, what would that have done? Because I'm a horrible improviser still to this day.
I think a lot of us are.
That. Yeah,
right.
Attribute that to Suzuki.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is though, you have to learn how to improvise. I mean, it is something you have to learn how to do and practice as much as you practice any skill. So if it's not something that is a part of your learning all the way through, it doesn't just come naturally to people. Right. I mean, maybe some people are better at it than others, but it is something that has to be focused on. But I think of like the great improvisers that we know, some really great pianists who can like play anything you want in any style, which is, to me, that's a whole different kind of brain. But the reality is they've spent a lot of hours. They've spent a lot of hours working on that. Working on confidence. There was a jazz violinist, a female jazz violinist in this West Hollywood study that I've seen several times perform. And I'm just in awe of her presence on stage and the way that she can improvise and take requests from the audience and just play whatever. It's such a skill. And you see the enjoyment and the joy that comes from her and then radiates into the audience when she's interacting in this way. Yeah. And you're right. It is confidence. It's confidence and a freedom in that confidence of like just letting your brain do the thing that it's learned how to do. Right. Not getting in your own way. I mean, that's an amazing thing. I get in my own way a lot. I know. You pick up something, it's hard not to get in your own way and say, oh gosh, this note doesn't sound exactly the way I want it to sound. And I'm going to obsess about this. Getting away from even when I go to warm up now, tonalization is what we're taught as young violinists to warm up on. And now I play themes, soundtrack music or something, just melodies from soundtracks that I like to play. Tell us a little bit about the word Melomaniacs, which That's right. I had not heard the word Melomaniacs until you put it out there. And tell me, what does it mean for the listener, and why did you choose it? That's so funny. I now have used the word so regularly that I forget that people don't know what it means. It is an actual word, melomaniac. It means a person who has an unusual fondness, love, or enthusiasm for music. And when I discovered this word, I thought, this is what I'm going to call this project. It also has technically the definition has the word abnormality in it as well, but I put that word to the side because I don't want to bring in abnormality, especially in a sociological study that gets into a whole other section of our work. Category of the literature. Yes. Sure. Yeah. So, but Melomaniac, and again, going back to creative data sharing, and with this project, that was very important to me to have different methodologies that were creative. I wanted a title that did not sound like a PhD thesis. And immediately I found, since I started shopping this around for funding back in 2023, that having a word like Melomaniacs attached to it, you are already kind of interested in what is that? I don't know what that is. And I might not know what your PhD thesis title is either, but maybe I'm more interested in a word of like Melomaniacs. And I found that it was very representative of musicians that I have studied. These are musicians that identify as musicians, violinists, flutists, etc. And this is all they want to do in life. It's an internal capital, to use a term that my DePaul advisor and I talked about a lot. This internal drive to just create, which kind of, you can reconcile that grit and not making money because you have this internal capital that just makes you want to make music. And that's what a melomaniac is. Do you think the internal capital, and this is a question I keep coming back to with many people, do you think the internal capital you're talking about is something that is innate to some people, or is it a matter of circumstance and opportunity, or do we all have it and some of us just haven't been able to tap into it? I think I'll be careful how I say this. I don't think everybody has the internal capital when you think about creativity. I do believe it's innate. I think what drives us to create is not something that I've seen in every individual that I come in contact with. I think it's something that is almost indescribable. And you make that your priority.
When we're talking about internal capital, I would call it like the internal musical life of having this maybe inviolable resource of knowledge, technical ability. It brings in your social capital, and it all adds up to this kind of motivation, this grit to keep going musically. And I don't think that everybody has that. I don't think even look at myself, I don't think I had that. And that was what made me step away from violin. I think in some ways that I've reconnected with it, but I don't compare myself to the musicians in this study. These are people that, again, are doing this professionally nonstop. And I had to put it away and be adjacent for so many years professionally in arts administration. I still got to be creative. But the internal capital I think about when it comes to creatives and people in this study, in the New York study, these musicians, I don't think that's learned. I think it's innate.
Do you think it can be raised or developed? Raised, I'm using this, I'm borrowing some finance parlance because of the capital. But
we have to bring it in somehow.
Right. But is it something that can be cultivated or taught? Or
it's something that can be, I think it's something that can be recognized and respected or legitimized, and to use the word that I'm using in this study. And this is, you can seek validation for it that will maybe allow you to continue with it. So yeah, maybe nurtured.
Given space for?
Yes.
I feel like as an arts educator, it feels to me that it's a key part of the profession beyond, teaching skills and you want students to develop artistically, musically, of course, but is creating an opportunity for them to feel that they belong to the wider community of artists, the community of musicians, because that sense of belonging, in my mind, nurtures the internal capital that you're talking about, or the feeling that, yes, my opinion, my gifts, my offerings are a part of this community and are valued. And so I'm going to do more of that, because I do think that once you get a little taste of it, it does encourage people to do more. Like you've and maybe some of that is practice, like the development of grit, the development of internal capital as an artist. Some of that is practiced behavior.
I think so.
Yeah.
But you're saying community and nurturing, and I think the space is very important here. In my work, I specifically look at musicians and musical spaces. And with that, if you look at the sociology of music, you're looking at individuals and the structures around the individuals. So in this case, the musicians and the musical spaces. And with this study, for musicians to have and nurture that internal capital, you do need that, as you said, community, or I'll say structure. And getting back to, say, the West Hollywood study, having a structure like West Hollywood, which has historically supported and attracted musicians, independent musicians, and then having these professional musicians continue to live here or work here, that's creating this interconnectedness between the two. And then what I'm trying to do now with this paper is also bring in this idea or this theory of moral capital, which is an economic theory. But like I said before, I like to take the social theories, economic theories, and turn them upside down when you look at them through the lens of musicians. And this moral capital theory is where we look at how commerce will co-evolve with moral rules and how that leads to cultural prosperity. And we have cultural prosperity here in West Hollywood. And that means beyond just the economic value that musicians are bringing, they're bringing social well-being to our town as well. And when moral capital is up, cultural prosperity goes up, right? They're correlated positively. But when we start depleting moral capital, the economic deterioration and our morale declines. And so you want to be careful that you always have a structure around musicians that will help with that internal capital that we're talking about. But always remembering that it's an interconnectedness between the structure that musicians find themselves in, as well as just the individual mentality.
Now, I also, it's been a really painful time for the city of Los Angeles. these last few months, and I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about that and what that has done to the city and done to its artists, and I mean all of its residents, really, and structures and places and spaces, like you said. And what have you noticed? What's happened in West Hollywood specifically?
So the fires are such an interesting. Now that we're a few months out, it's such an interesting area to go back and look at, because January was horrific, absolutely horrific. You watched the city just burning from, at this point, 3 different locations. And we left for a couple nights just to be safe once a Sunset fire broke out. And thankfully, the first responders got all that under control. But then you watched Altadena and the Palisades just absolutely get destroyed. And if you look at Altadena and look at the history of Altadena, which I don't think is getting as much coverage across the nation and the world, it is an artistic community historically, and parts of it Black community, but always having an artistic cosmopolitanism of it. And over 100 musicians lost their homes and their instruments in these fires. And this is not a wealthy neighborhood, middle-class neighborhood. Palisades has a little more wealth. There were plenty of renters there, of course, but Palisades seems to be getting all the attention when this artistic community of Altadena struggled so much. And it's artists of all, it's not just musicians, it's all the different artist classifications.
Right, but for working musicians to lose their instruments, I mean, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing left. I mean, that's a totally starting over.
Yes. And that's, you understand that. It's not just material. This is something that's an extension of who you are.
Yes.
These instruments become part of you in ways that I don't think we can even describe. So there's the economic value of it and what you perhaps put into it and invested in it. But then there's also the indescribable of what this instrument means to you.
Do you feel like the result of all this, I mean, maybe this is the hopeful spin, will create more solidarity in the artistic community? Or is that, I mean, that's what we hope. That's what we hope the future holds. Maybe it's too soon to say.
As part of this study, it was a 2-part research project. One was, of course, gathering the information from the musicians and the data from the musicians, but part 2 was what is more considered public sociology and creative data sharing. So in January, in between the kind of the fires and the mudslide periods, I held an event at the City Council chambers. This project was funded by the City of West Hollywood and fiscally sponsored by Fulcrum Arts. And we had politicians there, we had residents there, we had tourists there, we had just music lovers at this event. And I had 6 of the musicians on a panel discussion to discuss the findings of this, but then also had a concert afterwards. And I decided I was struggling with how to open this up, because a lot of people were hesitant. Do we go out during this period? And I'm a big believer that we don't just, we have to support our businesses. We have to support live music, live art, even in tragedy.
Sorry to interrupt. This was in January, right?
January. This is when I had the event, January 22nd, which is about a week and a half after the fires were, I don't want to say under control, but at least we knew there was an end point to them. And so I opened it up with a quote from one of the musicians in the study. And he said, I'm going to read it. "I always tell people, look at what they turn to first in moments of tragedy. What do people need? We need a song. We need to get together. We need to hold hands. We need to sing. We understand these things. Music making is genetic. It's in our DNA." And I think that was very true that night, that many musicians, many residents in our community just needed to get together and either talk about music, listen to music, and just be together. And that's what music does in times of tragedy. So I think people left with a sense of hope. I think they left with, they learned something new. They were able to be distracted. It was a moment of peace for some people. But yeah, musicians always show up to offer those peaceful moments.
That's a fantastic quote.
Yeah.
And I also just have to say, as a fellow data nerd, I appreciate the creative data because and having this event, because I'm sorry, spoiler to the listener if you're not aware of this, but nobody reads journal articles except for other nerds that already study what you study. So if you want people to know what you're doing, what you're talking about, we need to be doing more creative data events and ways of expressing what we're doing for the general public. So it's really exciting to me that you did this event.
Oh, thank you. Well, it was important, just like you said. What's my 17-page journal article is not going to get read, but people were very interested in hearing the musicians, your sample, talk about the findings. Why would I just read quotes when I can get what I consider the most interesting group of people in the world together to talk about it themselves? Isn't that more authentic? That's more real.
And to hear them play.
And to hear them play afterwards. The idea was, hear them orally, but also orally. Yes.
Yeah. Are you going to do any more events?
I'd like to. I have to kind of balance. Right now I have to write this academic voice, and I need to focus on that, and then we're going to work on the Edinburgh festival project, and then we're going to see where it goes. But I think this methodology of sharing your data, and we call it collaborative ethnography or sociable sociology, where you're really bringing your participants into the research, you're letting them really see themselves in the research, and then more importantly, you're letting them be a part of it and not just extracting information from them. All the musicians in this project were so willing to be a part of it and to talk. And when I asked them to be on the panel or asked them to be in this latest talk at DePaul in Chicago, it was an immediate yes.
That's exciting.
There's not hesitation. And also, they appreciate having a platform to talk and not just play. To actually to speak about their lives and let non-musician populations understand what it's like to be a musician and not just be asked, what's your day job?
Right.
How much money can you really make? Mm-hmm. It's not all economics.
Yeah. What's your next project? Well, can I ask that? Because you're so focused on finishing this one, but what do you have an eye on something that you're going to do next?
As funny as it sounds, actually game shows, the sociology of game shows has not been studied. And living out here, I've been exposed to a lot of game shows. I've gone on 4 or 5 different game shows. And there's a lot of some.
Which game shows have you been on?
I started, the first one I went on was a game show called In the USA Today, and that was with Tom Pappas. I don't think that one actually ever aired.
Okay.
It was complicated, a little too complicated for the game show audiences, which are varying, by the way. This is part of the study was to look at the game show, the host, the audiences, both in the studio and then at home, all the interactions between that and what drives people like me who just love game shows. So that was one of them. So yes, so then the second one I went on was Masterminds, which was Ken Jennings' spinoff of who hosts Jeopardy. I don't want to presume everybody knows who Ken Jennings is. And then I went on Let's Make a Deal with Wayne Brady, and I won $1,000. And then I decided I need to shoot higher, so I went on Price is Right, and I went on that 5 times before I got called down. And I won a foosball table that was $832. I played a game where you have 9 products and 3 platforms, and you have to decide which product falls within the 1 cent to $2.99, $3 to $4.99, or the $5 to $7.99. And you have, I think, 30 seconds to run back and forth, placing all these items and then hitting a button to see if you're right. And I watched $20,000 just slip away from my fingers. And everybody thinks, oh, didn't you ask the audience? Didn't you ask the audience what? You're supposed to, people look up and the audience shouts at you. But when you're on stage and you look out, all you just hear is screaming and people just very aggressively yelling and putting fingers up of different numbers. And it's very distracting. So I lost $20,000 on that.
The pressure and the adrenaline rush.
And then I went on the 1% Club with Patton Oswalt. And I I got kicked out of that pretty quickly. So it turns out I'm not really good on game shows. I just really enjoy going on them.
So you're going to do a study with game shows. Well, I mean, yeah, LA is the place to be. Like
the place for it. Yeah. And from what I can tell, it's not been studied sociologically. So I think that would be fun. I'm all about non-tragic topics. And if you look at sociological research, a lot of times it's surrounding race and gender and immigration, which can get into upsetting and tragic and exploitative type areas. And I choose to go towards the less tragic areas, like game shows and musicians.
I support that. I'm a wheel watcher personally. I could go all the way. I could take it. I know I could.
I can see you being very good at Wheel of Fortune.
Because I think it's the one that I watched the most, probably when I was a kid, you know, and then as an adult, it feeds into my nerd / hyper competitiveness, where I'll like scream at the screen. Like as soon as I know what the answer is, I'll like yell at like, Pat, I'd like to solve, but I know it's not Pat anymore. No, it's
Ryan Seacrest. Yeah, we have opinions about Ryan Seacrest in this house.
But it's still just, you know, that's what's in my DNA.
I have a fantasy of being on Wheel of Fortune, which I'm trying to get on, and then I win and I go to the final puzzle and I win that, and Ryan Seacrest or Pat Sajak, whomever is in this fantasy, goes to hug me, and I just push him out of the way and I run towards Vanna, and Vanna and I hug in front of the puzzle. That's my fantasy.
True hero. She's the true hero of the show. Well, I can't wait to read that and learn more about it. And if you please do a public event.
Oh, for game shows?
Yeah, do a public game show event. That would be amazing. Caroline, thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for doing this podcast, by the way. I think it's important to have people understand the idea behind creativity and how important it is to let creatives be creatives.
Thank you I really appreciate you coming to talk about it in a different way, because the more people I speak to and the more people I interview, it's really expanding my own thinking and my own mind. And I appreciate you being here. Caroline, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. If you'd like to learn more about what Caroline is up to, you can visit her website. It's carrienagy.com, or you can visit ours. It's www.arts-collab.com/creative-life-pod. Thanks for joining us today, everybody, and thanks for listening. And if you're enjoying the Creative Life podcast, remember, please like, subscribe, follow, share, anything you can do to spread the word. Until next time, keep making stuff. Bye.